Murder, She Told is an award-winning true crime podcast that dives into the lesser-known cold cases and true crime stories from the New England region and beyond. Created by me, Kristen Seavey. Murder, She Told uses detailed storytelling with an investigative twist, weaving in original interviews with those closest to the case, rooted in deep research, straightforward narratives, and the victims at the center of every story. Murder, She Told will speak to any listener, no matter where they call home. Learn more at murdershetold.com and find Murder, She Told now wherever you get podcasts.
Hi friend, my name is Eric Carter-Londine, and I am the host and producer of True Consequences podcast. This is not your typical true crime podcast. You see, my brother was murdered over 3 decades ago in New Mexico, and I have been fighting for justice for him ever since. I created this show to advocate for my brother's case and for others in my community who are seeking justice. I cover cases with an empathetic lens because I know what it's like to seek justice for a family member. True Consequences covers cases from New Mexico and the American Desert Southwest. Give my show a shot. You can listen wherever you get your favorite podcasts, or you can go to trueconsequences.com. Thanks for listening and stay safe.
A Nefarious Nightmare contains themes that may be explicit or triggering for some. Specific warnings and disclaimers will be mentioned in the show notes. A Nefarious Nightmare assumes all parties that are mentioned in these cases to be innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Welcome to Season 4.
Michelle O'Connell's death was initially ruled as a suicide, but the circumstances surrounding her death were questionable. Her boyfriend, a police officer named Jeremy Banks, reported the shooting. However, a second independent investigation revealed new evidence that suggested that her death was probably a homicide.
It seemed like Michelle had everything to live for, which raises the question of why she would take her own life. The assumption of suicide seems too convenient, especially given the involvement of a police officer. It's time to uncover the truth behind Michelle O'Connell's untimely death. With that, I'm Amanda Cronin.
And I'm Courtney Fenner. And A Nefarious Nightmare presents Collective Blue, Justice for Michelle O'Connell.
As we have said before, we have taken many case suggestions for this season. Once again, we want to thank the Keb from the Refiltered podcast, formerly Unfiltered. For this week's suggestion, we hope we do these cases justice. Shortly after we talk about Michelle O'Connell, we do have something to add in regards to the Jared Brightigan episode we did a few weeks ago. And one thing to mention is now that both this case and Jared's happened in Florida, please stay tuned because what we have to say about Jared Brightigan, his family, and the awesome Bexley box is very important. But first, let's dive into the case of Michelle O'Connell.
Michelle O'Connell was born on October 6th, 1985, and grew up in St. Augustine in what would be a tiny apartment with her single mother and 5 older siblings. At the age of 20, she became a mother herself to her daughter Alexis, who quickly became the center of her world. O'Connell worked tirelessly to provide for her daughter, taking on multiple jobs before finally landing her dream position at a daycare center. The job not only offered health insurance, but also allowed her to bring Alexis, who was 4 years old at the time, to work with her. In our opinion, Michelle's dedication to her daughter was admirable, and one would hope that her hard work and perseverance would pay off in the end.
Michelle's relationship with St. John County Sheriff's Officer Jeremy Banks was far from perfect. They argued constantly, and her family suspected that some of these arguments may have turned violent. Her sisters claimed that Michelle had hinted at physical and verbal abuse, but did not report it to the police because she didn't want to cause trouble for Banks or her family. This right here is a tragic example of the fear and silence that can surround domestic violence, especially when the abuser is in a position of authority.
Michelle had lunch with her sister, Chrissy, on the day of her passing. During lunch, she confided in Chrissy that she planned to break up with her boyfriend, Banks, that night and was scared that he would be angry. Despite opening up to her sister and her sister's warning, Michelle went to a Paramore concert with Banks that evening. Banks later told detectives that they argued before, during, and after the show. Michelle also sent cryptic texts to Chrissy during the concert.
The following is the text exchange from Michelle.
Promise me one thing. Lexi will be happy and always have a good life.
Promise you what?
That no matter what, Lexi will always be safe and loved.
What's going on? I'm scared.
I'll be there soon.
And this would be the last time either Chrissy or Alexis would hear from Michelle.
During the drive back to the house, Michelle stopped to have a serious conversation with Banks, which led to her telling him of her desire to separate. Upon arrival to his house, she started to pack her stuff up just to leave for good. Shortly after, around 11:20 p.m., a 911 call was made in which Banks was acting frantic and anxious. Shortly after, sheriff's deputies were met with Banks at his bathroom door, who was clutching his phone and showing signs of inebriation. Banks would later tell interviewers that while he was in the garage, he heard a pop coming from inside his home, and he knew that it was a gunshot. After the second gunshot was heard, he claimed that he rushed to the bedroom, found that it was locked, and so he kicked the bedroom door open. He then said that he found Michelle lying on the bathroom floor with his service weapon next to her and a gunshot wound to her mouth.
We often mention that we avoid interjecting an opinion on bias in these cases, but we ask you all a question here. If you are willingly wanting to break up with your significant other after a tumultuous relationship, it is possible to want to end your own life. I'm sure it is possible. But she never had any signs of suicidal ideation previous to this, which of course can be argued as, unfortunately, many people who show no signs will indeed carry this out as a plan. But on the other hand, remember that she told her sister that she felt like he would be angry if she went through with her plan to break up. And remember here that her sister did warn her. And with all of that in mind, after you take the warning, the Paramore show, the timeline of events leading up to this, you factor in the fact that she has a daughter and a loving family to live for, as well as her expressed desire to break up and the fear of his anger. In the foreshadowed text exchange sent to her sister, it doesn't seem to add up as her premeditating her own suicide. It's especially odd that the person that she was afraid of just so happened to find her that way as she was packing up to actively leave him.
Before we continue into the investigations, let's talk a bit about domestic violence statistics and facts. Oftentimes, a victim or survivor of domestic violence, while still in the relationship, will feel silenced and afraid to say anything. One reason is because their significant other who is perpetrating the acts of violence often threatens to hurt or even kill the victim, survivor, and or their loved ones. This makes the victim or survivor feel trapped and obligated to stay within the relationship. But unfortunately, it is more often than not that the victim of domestic abuse does not make it out alive. There are incidences where a fight will occur. The perpetrator of domestic violence at best will threaten to harm or kill, or at worst, use physical force to overpower and intimidate the victim. A lot of the time, the perpetrator will immediately apologize and swear to never do it again, which gaslights the victim into staying within the relationship. The perpetrator will then spend anywhere from a few days to a few weeks, and even a month or so in some cases, to coerce the victim into forgiveness and gain their trust back by buying them gifts, leaving pointed love notes and what have you, just to prove that they won't quote-unquote ever do it again, despite the fact that they always will and they always do. It's often an endless cycle for the victim where they are conflicted. They love the perpetrator, they are terrified of being hurt or killed, and they are silenced and never seek help.
With that common scenario in mind, it is important to note that these more than often not end in murder. According to ncadv.org, on average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the US. During 1 year, this equates to more than 10 million women and men. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men experience severe intimate partner physical violence, intimate partner contact sexual violence, and/or intimate partner stalking with impacts such as injury, fearfulness, post-traumatic stress disorder, use of victim services, contraction of sexually transmitted diseases, and etc. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced some sort of physical violence by an intimate partner. This includes a range of behaviors such as slapping, shoving, pushing, and in some cases might not be considered domestic violence, quote unquote. Also, 1 in 7 women and 1 in 25 men have been injured by an intimate partner.
1 in 10 women have been raped by an intimate partner. Unfortunately, data is unavailable on male victims. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have been victims of severe physical violence, for example, beating, burning, or strangling by an intimate partner in their lifetime. And finally, although there are many more statistics, but this one right here proves the point I mentioned a moment ago, 1 in 7 women and 1 in 18 men have been stalked by an intimate partner during their lifetime to the point in which they felt very fearful or believed that they or somebody close to them would be harmed or killed. And we emphasize this particular point. They felt very fearful or believed that they or someone close to them would be harmed or killed.
According to the same source, a study of intimate partner homicides found that 20% of victims were not the intimate partners themselves, but family members, friends, neighbors, persons who intervened, law enforcement responders, or bystanders. 72% of all murder-suicides involve an intimate partner. 94% of victims of these murder-suicides are female. We mention these statistics because A, they are extremely telling in this particular case, and B, it further tells you how much of a problem domestic violence is. And one thing we wish to tell you is that domestic violence does occur often when the person perpetrating the violent acts are in a position of some sort of power. Examples include some politicians, CEOs of businesses, law enforcement officials.
Upon the first investigation, police, when called to the scene, are often trained to investigate every single death that occurs to rule out the possibility of homicide. So in essence, they're trained to treat every scene of death as a homicide. However, the detectives on this particular scene were inexperienced and therefore took Banks' word for it and concluded that Michelle died by suicide. Without doing a thorough investigation, they notified her family and told them that she had succumbed to a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the mouth, with a medical examiner later confirming this. Given the fact that Michelle did indeed seem to have everything to live for, and knowing her particular personality, pretty much knowing her way better than anyone, her family did not believe this to be true.
In fact, what they did know is that Michelle had just landed her dream job, had a beautiful daughter to live for, and was trying to continue living her life, as evidenced by going to the Paramore concert we mentioned earlier, and that she even made plans to see some family and friends later that same week that she had passed. They thought something was fishy about this because the assessments did not present as fact to them, and nothing lined up. They also knew about Michelle and Banks' history of having an imperfect, to say the least, relationship. We do find out later that suspicious details of this case do come to surface. But one thing to note is that Michelle's family was never interviewed as a part of this investigation.
Now, Michelle O'Connell was right-handed, but crime scene photos showed Banks's gun lying near her left hand. They also showed that a second bullet was found lodged inside the carpet near her body, which this, in our opinion, would be indicative of a bullet missing the first time by a perpetrator, because why would someone who is right-handed shoot the floor and then themselves with the gun landing right next to their left hand. I mean, it just seems way too convenient. Another thing that is mentioned is that the tactical searchlight attached to the gun barrel, which is used to illuminate a target for better aim, was on, and that the gun's retention holster would have made it difficult for an inexperienced gun user to remove it from its holster.
Also found were 2 empty prescription pill bottles that belonged to Banks, which, according to Jacksonville.com, all of the pills were accounted for and none found in her system. These bottles were located in Michelle's purse, and another finding is an unexplained small cut just above her right eye. Potentially some sort of defensive wound, but nonetheless unexplained. And about 2 weeks later, Banks was videotaped for a second interview where he admitted that despite reading the police department's investigation report on the shooting, a report that was quote-unquote confidential, that he did not get any disciplinary action. With this knowledge, according to a friend of Michelle's by the name of Sierra Morris, quote, "He was treated like a brother. That's the best way I can put it. He was treated like a brother," end quote. This is just one example of what we have been saying for a long time. There are a ton of instances where police will stand behind what is known as the quote-unquote the blue wall of silence, or the blue wall, the blue shield, or to put it simply, protect with their own.
And then the second investigation. Speaking on the events that transpired in January of 2011, the O'Connell family, with their unwavering determination, exerted pressure on the elected Sheriff David Shore to request an independent state inquiry by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. This inquiry was led by Rusty Rogers, a former investigator, who quickly discovered that the initial investigation was mishandled from the start. It is at this point that investigators had collected Banks's gun, clothing, and other evidence. Unfortunately, they failed to have the items forensically tested for fingerprints, DNA, or gunshot residue, despite the presence of blood on Banks's shirt. Furthermore, investigators neglected to download Banks's cell phone data or to isolate and photograph Banks before he was interviewed. Additionally, investigators had not spoken to any neighbors or filed reports on what the attending officers had seen. Nonetheless, it is disheartening to see that the O'Connell family's efforts have led to another brick wall.
Rusty Rogers took the initiative to conduct his own thorough investigation into the horrific events that occurred at Banks' house. 2 neighbors heard distressing sounds emanating from the home, such as screaming and yelling as though there were heated arguments, and a female screaming, "Help, help." And when giving a polygraph test, the neighbors passed, which, while we know that polygraph tests are faulty and also don't hold up in court, but it's still somewhat of a testament to the credibility of their statements. But honestly, what would these 2 neighbors have to gain from lying anyways? Additionally, the revelation that Banks had a history of violence towards Michelle O'Connell, as reported by her daughter Alexis, only serves to strengthen the case against him. Dr. Frederick Hobbin then privately changed his ruling from suicide to homicide based on the evidence presented to him. Rogers' efforts to interview the O'Connell family sent evidence to forensic testing and hired a crime scene reconstruction expert that all indicate that his unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth. Overall, it is reassuring to know that there are individuals like Rogers who are dedicated to seeking justice and bringing closure to those affected by such tragedies.
At this point, the latest evidence in the case had finally come to light. In February of 2011, forensic results were released that have raised a whole new set of questions. It has been discovered that there was no blood on Banks's gun, and his fingerprints and DNA were conspicuously absent from the weapon. This is particularly important given that he had worn his gun belt during his previous shift. Banks had denied cleaning his gun before the police arrived on the scene that night, and he also denied washing his hands before the gunshot residue test. It is surprising to note that the residue found was insignificant given the amount of time he had spent near the body after Michelle's death. All of this new information is certainly a step in the right direction.
Michelle's DNA was found on Banks' gun, but not on the 2 pill bottles in her purse. Additionally, it's interesting to note that 2 small spots of Michelle's blood were discovered on the inside of Banks' t-shirt. Although Banks claimed he didn't know how the blood got there, we do know that the crime scene reconstructionist made some noteworthy findings. For instance, it was determined that the shooter had to have been left-handed, which is significant since Banks is left-handed, which Michelle was not.
Upon careful consideration of all the facts, it had been reported by the New York Times that the reconstructionist has determined that the circumstances surrounding the case are consistent with homicide. However, it is worth noting that Dr. Hoban refrained from filing O'Connell's amended death certificate as per the instructions of the state attorney, who had advised him to wait until the investigation was complete. Subsequently, a new chief medical examiner was appointed who upheld the original verdict that O'Connell's death was a suicide. Despite this, a special prosecutor gathered the O'Connell family in March of 2012 to announce the official cause of death, which was determined to be suicide. Unfortunately, this would result in Scott, Michelle's brother, exploding in anger and later losing his job as a sheriff's deputy due to his outburst.
Sheriff Soar's thorough 152-page assessment of his agency's and Rogers' investigations is made known in the aftermath. 2 pages of the report listed some of his own team's mistakes, and the rest of the report was either regarded as excellent work done by his agency or had criticized Rogers himself. It only further highlights the superiority of Sheriff Soar's team. Additionally, the judge's dismissal of the civil lawsuit filed by Banks in 2018 is a clear indication that Rogers had probable cause to detain Banks for murder. Finally, the decision to rehire Scott O'Connell in April 2013 was made, even given his accusations that the state agency manipulated his family into thinking his sister was murdered.
In 2016, Michelle O'Connell's remains were exhumed and meticulously examined by a forensic pathologist. It was then discovered by the pathologist that her jaw was fractured into 2 pieces, which is a crucial detail that had been omitted from the initial autopsy report. This new revelation begs the question, could a forceful blow to O'Connell's jaw have caused the fracture prior to the fatal gunshot wound? Such a discovery indeed warrants further investigation.
It is truly heartening to see the unwavering determination of Michelle O'Connell's family in the pursuit of justice. Despite the new evidence in her case, her death is still labeled a suicide, but her family firmly believes that she was murdered by Jeremy Banks. The recent development of Ellie Washtock's murder was only added to the complexity of the case. It is truly commendable that Washtock, an amateur sleuth, was also sometimes known as Eli, was independently investigating Michelle O'Connell's death in the months leading up to her own murder. It is a tragedy that Washtock was killed for their investigation, but it is a testament to their dedication to the pursuit of truth. The O'Connell family's belief that Washtock's murder is connected to Michelle's case only strengthens their resolve to seek justice.
Quote, "He was finished with his work. He was confident we would prove Michelle was murdered," she said. Unfortunately, Eli Washtock's case is still cold. Banks was never charged with a crime and continues to serve as a St. Johns County Sheriff's deputy. However, and while it's disheartening to know that Michelle O'Connell's family is still searching for justice, it does look as though there are answers here, whether implied or otherwise. Patty O'Connell's statement to ABC News is a testament to the fact that justice is an integral part of the grieving process. It's crucial to obtain justice, and the yearning for it never truly fades away.
Before we wrap up today's episode, please don't forget to join our Patreon for bonus content, such as our Not So Nefarious Criminals podcast. Lately, we haven't been as stringent about the content for that due to life factors happening, but rest assured we'll be back on top of it. To explain, each week we have a guest we always talk about the National Day, which is my favorite thing about the podcast, by the way. And if you know, we were coming up on National Cracker Day, and you know we have to talk about that one.
All right, well, assuming our episode falls on that day, we will see. I will say that I've noticed the prevalence of Florida man stories as they're trending quite a bit, so much so that there's a Florida man show on Netflix now. So that will probably be brought up on a future episode of Not So Nefarious Criminals. But yeah, we talk about the lighter side of crime, such as Florida Man. It's not just Florida Man, though. It's all kinds of crazy shit.
We will be at the 2023 True Crime and Paranormal Podcast Festival in Austin, Texas, August 25th through 27th. Come see us and let's kick it. I can't wait to see Kristen Savvy from Murder, She Told. She just recently covered a case that was well done, and we will be covering that case in the future as well.
I agree, and I also can't wait to see Nina Instead from Already Gone Pod. She also hosts They Walk Among America, Don't Talk to Strangers, Dark Archive, and others. I also know that advocates and family members for Jared Bridegan from the Bridegan Foundation will be there. As many of you know, we covered that case just a few weeks ago. Speaking of, we have to talk to you all about the Bexley Box.
It is so heartwarming to hear about the creation of the Bexley Box by Kristen Bridegan in September of 2022. This initiative was established in memory of her beloved husband, Jared Bridegan, who was tragically murdered earlier in the same year. You can hear more about this case in episode 10 of season 4 called Ambush at the Sanctuary: What Happened to Jared Bridegan. A brief summary that is, the incident occurred on February 16th when Jared was ambushed and fatally shot right outside his vehicle. The most heart-wrenching part of this tragedy was that their 2-year-old daughter Bexley was in the car and witnessed the entire incident, helplessly strapped into her car seat. It is so amazing and impressive that Kristen has taken this initiative to honor her husband's memory and provide toddlers like Bexley who have faced similar traumatic experiences. It is truly inspiring to see people like Kirsten who turn their personal tragedies into something positive for the community, because this is just one example of what compassion and true empathy really looks like.
The creation of Project Bexley Box is truly inspiring and brings a tear to my eye. It is so awesome to see efforts being made to alleviate the distress and anxiety that children may experience when brought to police stations without their caregivers. Bexley Box is a wonderful initiative that seeks to provide essential items and comforting extras to these children. There is a remarkable amount of these extras, such as stuffed animals and books, coloring supplies, diapers and wipes, snacks, pre-mixed formula, sippy cups, and blankets in each Bexley box. These boxes are delivered directly to law enforcement agencies to better equip them to care for children who are victimized by crime. With the support of individuals like you all, we can all work together to ensure that refillable Bexley boxes are available in every police department across the country. We both, especially as moms, urge you to contribute to this noble cause and visit the Bexley Box on display at TCPF this year.
This is just one reason that you all cannot miss this year's True Crime and Paranormal Podcast Festival. There will be a ton of great people there, and you do not want to miss out. It's so much fun, and you get to be around advocates and awesome creators. Tickets are for sale at truecrimepodcastfestival.com. Make sure you use our code BEES, BEES, at checkout for 15% off your tickets. We also will have fun stuff to give away, so come on out.
It is imperative that we continue to amplify voices for those that feel silenced. We have got to start seeing movement in all cases, not just cherry pick those that seem convenient or easy. We have got to raise our voices and start speaking out for justice. When you are feeling powerless in a domestic violence situation, you have little choice but to rely on another person to speak up. As we often say, see something, say something, and always report. Even if it seems like it could be nothing, you just never know. If you or a loved one are a victim or suspected victim of domestic violence, we urge you to call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800 877-799-7233 or visit the website at thehotline.org. Of course, these will be listed in our show notes, and please know you are not alone and you are so worthy, no matter what anyone says or does to you.
And at the end of the day, Michelle O'Connell was a bee. Her family and friends are bees. Just remember that bees are resilient, beautiful creatures who are beneficial to the world. They are also vulnerable. With this knowledge, we must make damn sure we protect the bees at all costs, whether it be from people in positions in power or otherwise, because bees are what makes us all survive and thrive. Beehives are a collective of like-minded individuals who either have been victimized or have loved someone who has been victimized. And with this collective, the bees can fly fast and they do sting. So, be vigilant, for when you mess with the bees,
You get the hive.
Thank you for listening to A Nefarious Nightmare. Music used in the theme was originally recorded by Ghost Stories Incorporated, remixed by Ryan RCX Murphy. Additional background music is provided by Epidemic Sound. A Nefarious Nightmare is scripted, researched, and produced by Courtney Finner and Amanda Cronin. This podcast is a Cloud 10 podcast managed by Sim Sarna, Sahiba Krieger, and Jamie Rice of Murderish and Dirty Money Moves. You can help us grow our show by leaving us a 5-star written review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Or you can join our Patreon for lighthearted bonus content. Thank you, and as always, be vigilant.